The series of actions initiated by various departments of the Government of India is unprecedented in Indian corporate history.
Our investigating agencies are utilizing every provision of the law, really both to recover the amounts as also to make sure that we are able to get these people back.
The investigative agencies do believe that an offence has been committed for which a person is required in India.
Our agencies have a good case against him. They followed the correct procedure. It's now for the British courts to execute and take the relevant decisions.
And news is breaking on your screen. Supreme Court holds Mallya guilty of contempt. The Supreme Court has directed Vijay Mallya to appear in person on the next date of hearing, which is scheduled on the 10th of July.
Good evening and welcome to our special coverage on the Mallya saga. Let me take you through the big development in the case. The Supreme Court has issued an ultimatum to Vijay Mallya, holding him guilty of contempt. Now, the Apex Court has observed that the liquor baron misled the court on his wealth and has ordered him to appear before it on the 10th of July. Now, this comes at a time when the joint team of the CBI and the Enforcement Directorate is going from pillar to post to ensure Mallya's extradition to India. To discuss the latest in the Mallya saga, we're joined by legal experts Ramesh Vaidyanathan, Advait Sechna, Jain Gupta, Suhas Tuljapurkar here with us in our studios. But before I get to my guests, let me bring in our colleague Ashmit Kumar, who's been tracking the action in court. Ashmit, you've been following this case from the very beginning. The Supreme Court has clearly run out of patience with Vijay Mallya.
Right, so after the extradition proceedings in the UK, fresh pain for Vijay Mallya, this time at the hands of the Indian Apex Court. The Supreme Court spelling it out very clearly and convicting him of contempt of court. The Apex Court making it very clear that it believes that on 2 counts, Vijay Mallya is guilty of contempt. But it doesn't end there. The Supreme Court also goes on to pass very clear directions that Vijay Mallya, to take these proceedings forward, to take the contempt proceedings forward, will have to appear in person on the next date of hearing, which happens to be July 10th. So very clear, unequivocal orders being passed by the Apex Court. Let's go into the reasoning. The one concern that the bankers had been citing throughout is that there was non-disclosure of assets as far as Vijay Mallya is concerned, and this with specific respect to the $40 million received from Diageo, which Vijay Mallya then distributed amongst his children and did not inform the banks or the courts about, which the banks argued was in flagrant violation of standing court orders. Let's take a look forward at what is in store for him as far as contempt proceedings are concerned. Under the Contempt of Court Act, he is looking at a 6 months jail term. That's the maximum term that can be slapped. But here's an interesting caveat that under Article 142, the Apex Court, acting under those powers, can even extend the jail term further beyond 6 months, as we've seen more recently as far as Subrata Roy is concerned. So that is an option available to the Apex Court. On the road forward, as far as the UK extradition proceedings are concerned, let's keep in mind that the Supreme Court's powers and its jurisdiction are limited to the borders of India, and hence we understand that this order will only have a guiding force and not a binding force. But having said that, also keep in mind that expect the Indian authorities to push in the UK, to push the argument in the UK that if UK expects their court's orders and decrees to be respected in India, the Supreme Court of India's orders needs to be respected back in the UK as well. And that's the message that they will be sending across to the UK extradition court.
All right, Ashmit, thanks very much for joining us and giving us a sense of what the Supreme Court has ruled today. Let me go across now to our legal experts. Ramesh Vaidyanathan, let me start by asking you what you made of the Supreme Court order and the implications now as far as Vijay Mallya's extradition proceedings, which are currently underway in the UK, are concerned.
I would say, Shireen, that this is a major setback from the perspective of Indian law, because any proceeding now in India, he will be seen as a contemner. And he's not going to get a favorable hearing unless and until he purges the contempt. So to that extent, I think this is a major setback. He's going to be referred to as a contemner in all these proceedings, which is so therefore the element of discretion that sometimes courts offer or indulgence that the court offer may not be available to him as a contemner. But in terms of its impact on the extradition proceedings itself, I don't think the impact will be significant, because the extradition proceedings will be tested on entirely different grounds. There is already a request which is gone, and the request is based on a large 1000-page chart sheet. So effectively, whether or not there is a tribal offense made out in that request will be the determining factor. The fact that an order of contempt has been passed by the Supreme Court of India, in my view, will have very little impact, if at all any impact.
Okay, Advait Setna, would you agree with what Ramesh has said, that while this may be a major setback for Vijay Mallya in India, this will have limited bearings on the extradition proceedings that are currently underway? The next date of hearing is slated for the 17th of May. Or do you believe that the UK court will take cognizance of the fact that the Supreme Court has held that there has been non-disclosure of information by Vijay Mallya, virtually amounting to basically misleading the court?
Yeah, Shireen, I tend to agree with what was said, partly in the sense that definitely it is a huge setback as far as Vijay Mallya is concerned, and the Apex Court has now categorically held that his personal presence would be required, and that is the only way that he can be taken to justice as far as the Indian law and the massive evasion of the Indian laws is concerned. As far as the aspect of extradition goes, I think that in my experience, this would have a sizable impact on the UK courts, because they would be considering a bundle of factors while considering the request of extradition of the Indian government. So as the Apex Court has now categorically held that his personal presence is mandated on the 10th of July, I think it will have a positive bearing and it will have an impact on the extradition process. I do believe that this order from the Apex Court, which is the highest court of the land, in a sense will help even to some extent even to expedite the extradition proceedings to ensure that Vijay Mallya is being brought to the country as expeditiously as possible. So this is a setback from a sense that even the hopes of getting Vijay Mallya in fact are kind of brightened as a result of this order which is passed today.
Okay, so you're slightly disagreeing with the point that Ramesh was making. You believe that this will have a bearing and an impact on the extradition proceedings that are currently underway. But Jain Gupta, the Supreme Court order today is a big shot in the arm as far as the Enforcement Directorate and the CBI are concerned, because the Enforcement Directorate in its charge sheet has been talking about this $40 million payment that Vijay Mallya received from Diageo, which has now found its way into the accounts, overseas accounts of his children. This is part of the ED's charge sheet that has now been presented to the UK authorities. So the CBI and the ED perhaps today are feeling vindicated.
See, I would say that it is many factors which are going against Mr. Mallya, and this is one of the factors. And this 40 million that you are talking is just one tip of the iceberg. It is not only 40 million. But when you analyze the today's case, you have to keep in mind that when Supreme Court has passed an order asking Mr. Mallya to appear before it on 10th of July, and he's already said that you are in contempt of the court, he has to remember the situation that was faced by Mr. Sahara when this Supreme Court passed a similar order, and when Mr. Sahara did not appear, Supreme Court put him to jail. Second issue is this: how far it is going to help the extradition process. Now, any judgment is decided on two factors. One is the hard factors, hard fundamental factors, and soft factors. Now, on hard fundamental factor, it is not going to make any change, because the court in UK is going to consider the fundamental aspect of the case, what is the fact and what is the law and something. But then there are many soft factors in the process, and the soft factor will be that the Supreme Court of India has already passed a judgment against a person. It is not a district court, it is not a small court, it is the highest court of the land. And as other court will say that there is a mutual treaty, and you respect me, I respect you. So that will work. So probably that may work, and extradition process will be faster. But my issue is this, that probably the agencies in India will have to broaden their things. As we had pointed out in our report earlier, in the case of White and Mackay, when the divestment took place, United Spirits took a 4,500 crore hit. You know, where that money has gone, why there was so much loss, that needs to be investigated, because on all 7 years they have been saying that White and Mackay has been performing well. So all these things will have to be opened
Mr. Gupta, you know, the ED and the CBI have put together an extensive charge sheet, and the $40 million receipt from Diageo is just one aspect that they have been investigating. They're investigating and have put forward a lot of the information on issues like the White and McKay matter that you talked about. Of course, that is all source-based information. But let me go across to Suhas Tuljapulkar. Suhas, the Supreme Court, while directing Mallya to appear before it on the 10th of July, has also said that it will allow Mallya an opportunity to present his case. Do you believe that as Ramesh was pointing out, I mean, that, you know, will allow Mallya any kind of flexibility, any kind of relief at all?
Very doubtful, Shireen. I don't think that will allow flexibility for Mr. Mallya. However, I mean, answering your earlier question, if I recollect right, the extradition treaty says that the offense would mean, for the extradition purposes, an offense where the punishment is more than 1 year. Under the Court of Contempts Act, the maximum punishment is that of 6 months. Having said that, it's a huge prejudice and bias point that fundamentally goes to the rule of law, and whether a person who is being sought to be extradited is abiding by rule of law and honoring the courts of his host country would be the question, and that would be huge bias and prejudice that will be played up.
In fact, let me just take our viewers through what can happen under the Contempt of Court proceedings. Maximum punishment under the Contempt of Court Act is 6 months. Under exceptional circumstances, under the exercise of powers under Article 142, the Supreme Court can impose a longer jail term. Under the Supreme Court rules, parties facing contempt need to appear in person before the Supreme Court, and that is exactly what the Supreme Court has directed Mallya to do, to appear before it on the 10th of July. But let me go across now to my colleague Sanjay Surya, Bureau Chief in London, who's been tracking the extradition proceedings in the Metropolitan Court. Sanjay, appreciate you joining us. You know, you've been tracking this story in London, Sanjay. Given what we've seen from the Supreme Court here in India, what kind of impact do you see this having?
Well, for an extradition to happen, there will be two principal considerations before the Westminster Magistrates Court here. First, that the allegations made should constitute an offense also in this jurisdiction. Second, that there should be prima facie evidence that an extradition can be made. Now, the Supreme Court order today has a very strong bearing on the first. More than the material issue, even the 40 million, there can be arguments, there can be disputes, but there is a fundamental point being made about the Supreme Court being misled, being misinformed, that incorrect statements were made, important information was withheld. To the Supreme Court, this constitutes contempt of court. But we were talking about commonality, dual criminality, commonality of an offense across the jurisdictions. In courts here, this kind of thing would amount to perjury. You know, perjury is taken very seriously by the courts here. Misinforming, misleading a court is a very serious offense. To the extent that the court here goes to the Supreme Court ruling and is convinced that there indeed was a misrepresentation made to the court, that is certain to have a very strong bearing on the outcome of the hearings here.
Sanjay, I'll come back to you in just a second, but let me get a comment in from Ramesh Vaidyanathan. Ramesh, you just heard what our colleague Sanjay had to say, and that was the point that I was making as well. Forget whether it's 40 million or any other number, but the fact that the Supreme Court believes that Vijay Mallya misled the apex court, Vijay Mallya withheld what the Supreme Court believes is material information, and as Sanjay was pointing out, that might be seen by the UK court as amounting to perjury and hence could have serious consequences for Mallya.
Shireen, as I mentioned earlier, I think the reason why this decision of today is extremely significant is today is the first time that Mallya has actually been held guilty and could possibly be there could possibly be an arrest warrant on July 10th when he doesn't show up, because in all other cases of arrest warrants so far against him, it's for non-appearance. This is the first time that he's actually been heard through counsel and an order of contempt has been passed against him. So I don't want to undermine the importance of this order, so please don't get me wrong. But the fact is that, see, there are already filings made before the extradition authorities in the UK. the evidence is going to be tested on the basis of what is already on record. The contempt by itself can, to some extent, have some kind of a rhetorical, impact, if I may use that word loosely. But I think essentially whether or not this is an extraditable situation will be entirely tested on the basis of what's been filed already and not on the basis of what may have transpired afterwards. And my own feeling is that even if this is brought on record before the extradition authorities, it's not really going to have any great impact. So I stand by that statement.
Okay. Okay, let me quickly get Sanjay to respond to that and also to give us a sense of what we can now expect. Sanjay, I believe the next date in the extradition proceedings is the 17th of May. And also if you wanted to respond to the point that Ramesh was making.
Well, it is quite true that there has been an extradition request made. This court ruling comes today. After that request has been submitted. But there is no cast iron date for submission of data or making representations. It does help in a sense that the British law is not written and very clear and watertight and compartmentalized on these issues. These are the first representation made is really at heart a diplomatic move. It's a Home Office and Foreign Office respond to an Indian government request. It's a diplomatic response. And therefore, what we have now is the Home Office and the government offices working almost like a post office in forwarding something to the court for the court to consider. The court will consider that, but that is not to say that the court will not consider other representations made before it.
All right, Sanjay and gentlemen, we are going to have to take a break, but we will continue our special discussion on the Supreme Court's latest order in the Mallya case. That and more when we return. Stay tuned.